To the people on a plane on September 11th, what did your pilots tell you when they grounded all flights? My mom worked in the accounting department for American Transair, and according to her, there was only one ATA plane that had to land in Nova Scotia. The passengers weren't told about planes crashing until they landed. There were so many planes that had already landed, that they were lined up in rows. Not me, but my mom, who was and still is a flight attendant. She was working a flight from DFW BOS that morning. They were approaching the Northeast when they were diverted to Akron, Ohio. I'm not sure what she was specifically told, but I know they knew something was up. Their flight communications are even included in transcripts from that day. By that time both towers had been hit and they were headed west over Pennsylvania to land. My mom said they were all on edge, not really comprehending the severity of the situation and wondering whether they might be hijacked themselves. They were communicating with Cleveland on the ground when the hijacking of United 93 began over western PA, so there was communication between both flights and ground trying to confirm that the screaming etc. they heard on the frequency was really a hijacking. Apparently United 93 was right behind them, and my mom says the crew was back and forth up in the cockpit and in the galley looking out the windows trying to see the plane, while trying not to scare passengers. My father was actually on the runway in Newark about to take off on a business trip when the first plane hit. They waited on the runway for a while, and then the pilot came on and said that there was a tragedy in New York and that they were returning to the terminal and that the flight was cancelled. Back inside the airport, they were greeted with SWAT forcing everyone in the airport to the baggage claim. At this point everyone knew what happened. My father has extremely poor hearing and accidentally went outside instead of down to the lower level where the baggage claim is. He said there was no one outside, and that it was very eerie. He was then met by a few officers with long guns who yelled at him to get to baggage claim. Once he got his luggage in the chaos of people, he walked all the way to the private car park place a mile or two away. The buildings had already collapsed, and the whole walk he could see the smoke rising high above the skyline. I was 4 years old and in preschool, and that morning I was out of school due to illness. I called my mother into the living room when PBS lost its sound. Its antennae was on Twin Towers, and she flipped through the channels and discovered what was going on. Obviously she freaked the fuck out since my father was on a plane from the airport where a plane just exploded from. I vividly remember once the second plane hit, she freaked out much more, screaming like crazy, and I hid under the coffee table covering my ears. The view of the towers on the TV from under the coffee table is my only vivid memory of 9/11. I have a few other foggy memories, but another clear one is the next day at preschool, when a kid said that the towers fell down, and a teacher told him to stop talking. North Jersey lost a lot of commuting fathers in the attack, and my town's library has a large piece of bent metal from the wreckage as a memorial of the couple people from my small town who died. Here is an old thread on Flyer Talk regarding being on a plane during 9/11. An excerpt. On September 11th, I was listening to CH-9. I was on a flight out of ORD to Oz, 757, seated in 5F. We had just taken off and were climbing to cruise. A flight out of Rockford, Illinois was squeezing between us and the UA in front of us. I watched as he lined up to get on the highway westbound. Then, abruptly, the Rockford flight called ATC and requested immediate clearance to return to home. ATC responded with some quick direction and asked if they were experiencing trouble. No, just directed to return home by company pronto. Strange, I thought. Then the UA in front of us requested emergency clearance back to ORD. Long pause from ATC. Now, this is Chicago Center airspace. There are no pauses. Certainly not 30 to 40 seconds of dead air. Man, that is weird, I thought. Then like a starter's pistol went off, the comm light up. Another plane wreck. Clearance, then another. Boom, boom, boom. Nothing from ATC. I nudged the guy next to me and said put on CH-9. He could see by the expression on my face, I was serious. ATC got on the air and started by saying this was going to go quick and pilots needed to listen up. Protocol responses are not required, just do exactly as I say quickly. Then it began. UA hash, turn right heading blah, blah expect Springfield Airport. SWA hash, turn left heading blah, blah expect Rockford. Delta hash. This went on for about 3 solid minutes before I rang the bell for the FA who was passing out breakfast. Our number had not yet been called. The FA came by and I said we are all going back to O'Hare, they are landing every plane in the sky. What is going on? She looked at me in disbelief and kind of leaned down to look out the window. I could see that she was about to start to tell me not to worry about it when we pitched right at about 45s. It was so quick it nearly dumped the FA in my lap. Not entirely plane related, but my dad worked near the towers and got out the train to see the second plane crash. It really messed him up inside. We lived in the Bronx, and every day he went to the Park Avenue Armory where people lined up to find out about their loved ones. My dad noticed that many didn't speak English and they were having a hard time communicating. He wrote translation services on a piece of paper and stapled it to his shirt and spoke Spanish, French, and Russian. He got the relief effort to spread the word to get translators. It was all over the radio and TV. The Japanese government heard and sent their best translators by special permission on a direct flight to New York, one of the few planes that could come to New York. A Japanese bank had workspace in the towers, and the relatives of the workers also came. By the end, hundreds of people came, even those of more obscure languages from Algeria and Azerbaijan, among others. There was a fleet of Punjabi, Afrikaans, Creole, Korean, Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Polish, Chinese. It's wondrous to see how something as simple as talking binds all of us. The city began implementing translation services everywhere since. I was 12 years old at the time and didn't understand the impact. Today at 28, my dad was a hero. Edit to show you all an article about my dad's translation efforts shown in the Spanish language newspaper, El Diario New York. /u/Let's Draw 2 ran the article through Google Translate in English. Thank you all for congratulating him. And thank you for the gold, kind internet stranger. I love my dad very much. My dad was an armed high-ranking federal agent. He was flying from DC to Miami, I think, definitely FL. He was woken up somewhere over Southern Virginia, and asked to come to the cockpit. The pilots told him to guard the cockpit, and that he was authorized to shoot. He spoke to someone confirming the authorization. He was given the jump seat next to the cockpit during landing, so he could see if anyone stood up. He told me later that the reason they were allowed to continue to Miami instead of putting down in the Carolinas was because he was on the plane. When he died in 2010, my mom showed me the piece of paper he had kept, with his notes from that radio transmission. I think my older brother has them now. Side note, when he landed, he was met by the 3 guys he was flying down to meet with, and they all drove back overnight, getting back just in time to help oversee the search at the Pentagon. I've never seen him as shaken as the day he brought home a piece of the desk from his office. A friend of mine was a pilot for Singapore Airlines flying Singapore to Seattle, I think he said. He was diverted into Canada, but only told the passengers the bare minimum that they were being diverted to another airport. It wasn't until they got inside the airport terminal and saw the TV that they understood why they were diverted. Even he was surprised at the scale compared to what ATC told him. He was also the pilot in command of the first commercial aircraft to enter US airspace when it was reopened, and he recalled being terrified of deviating from his planned track. He had an uneasy feeling in the back of his mind that there was likely an F-14 a few thousand feet above him ready to vaporize them if he moved unexpectedly. I was on a United flight from Newark to Atlanta that morning. We were in the air when everything happened and were supposed to land about 9 o'clock. Just before landing they held us in a holding pattern in the air. At about 9:30 we landed. No announcements were made on the plane. Just as we got to the gate and people started turning their phones on, I hear phones start ringing everywhere. What happened? A plane hit what? At that point my phone started to ring as well. It was my wife wanting to make sure I wasn't on one of the planes. And she filled me in on what was known then. The pilot and cabin crew did not say anything about what happened. There was an eerie silence in the terminal. I did not see any TV screens. I went directly to the car rental company, got a car and started driving north, back to NY. Listening to the radio as much as I could the whole way back. I flew from Sweden to Turkey. Before boarding the plane, I remember that everyone in the airport stood in silence watching the news on the different TV monitors in the airport. It was a really weird feeling that it was so silent in a usually hectic place. The flight went on as usual. The attack happened just before we checked into the airport. My wife was flying Paris, NYC. The pilot first came on the PA and said bombs were being dropped on US soil, airspace was closed and they were diverting to Halifax because they didn't have enough fuel to return to Paris. Then they came on and said Halifax was closed and they would have to return to France. Not enough fuel? The plane landed in Brest, on the west coast of France. No clue how much fuel the plane was left with. My wife was put up in a very nice hotel with the rest of the business class passengers, and was stuck for 4 very surreal days in Paris. There was a doctor on board who was flying to NYC to do an organ transplant. He was able to access a fax machine in the cockpit to tell the medical team in NYC that he wouldn't make it and they should halt the organ harvest from the donor. Fascinating! I was on a plane from LA to Melbourne, with a stopover via Auckland, and 9/11 happened while we were in the air. Halfway through the flight, all the flight attendants got really nervous, and the pilot told us that due to a safety issue, the seatbelt sign was kept on throughout the flight, which we all found really confusing. When we landed in NZ, there were armed guards with machine guns to greet us, which is very out of the ordinary for New Zealand. The first reports the flight attendants gave us was that it was the Empire State Building that had been attacked. That was how confused initial reports were. We were luckily allowed to fly on to Melbourne, but after that all international flights were grounded for a few days. Nothing, complete silence about it. I was flying from Toronto to Montreal. I noticed that the breakfast service ended abruptly and the stewards were acting funny, standing at the bulkheads and visually scanning the passengers, etc. I listened to hear if the plane sounded funny or was behaving oddly. Nothing was out of the ordinary, so I went back to reading my paper. Disembarked into a sea of people at Yule. When I came down the escalator I didn't know where I was going to stand, that many people. Many Americans that had no idea they would be visiting Canada that day. They were on the radio asking for people with extra rooms to lend, and Montrealers took them all into their homes. Within an hour they were saying they had enough available rooms. Called my wife to tell her I was okay. My kids were freaking out at school because they were young and all they knew was that daddy was flying for work today, and then everyone was talking about planes crashing. I spent the week working near the airport and marveling at the clarity of the sky. Ended up driving home because flights still weren't cleared to take off. Saw several heavy military jets following the 401 highway at low altitude near CFB Trenton. Edit: this is amazing to watch.